Welcome, and we're so glad that you're here for another mental health and wellness chat. I'm Brittany, and I'm one of your VC Counseling Center counselors, and today I'm here with a very special guest.
I'm Babette Lowe. I'm the Dean of Academic Support and Student Success.
And we're here to have real conversations about the emotional challenges that students face and discuss navigating them. So today we're going to dive into a topic that hits close to home for just about every college student, right? Failure, something that we're all going to do multiple times in our lifetime. So whether it's a bad grade, a missed opportunity, or a personal setback, we all stumble. But what if falling down is actually part of moving forward? So we're going to bust some common myths about failure, explore why it feels so heavy, share some practical ways to build resilience and self-compassion. So this isn't about pretending that everything's fine. It's all about learning to fall forward. And kind of like what I was saying earlier, whenever, me and Babette first sat down to record today was, I feel like you're a really great person to have this conversation because I feel like not only do you have experiences with so many students that are trying to get back on track or kind of figure out where they want to go next after a setback, but I just feel like in general, you're just a genuinely positive, like inspiring human being in general. So, and I'm excited for this conversation. So, and for those students who may not know, tell us about your role at the college and how it is related to setbacks or failure in some way.
Okay, I oversee the Academic Support Division, which is the Learning Center, the Tutoring Center, which we now call the Learning Center. It's success coaching. Students that are first time in college, or if they've got below a 2.0, it's required that they meet with the success coach. I oversee adult ed, where we have a lot of students that start there and then move to the college.
Yeah.
I also have the first frameworks course that students are required to take, the EDUC 1300 class. So I do get to see a lot of students. One of the ones that I really enjoy, the students don't enjoy it as much, but because they're below a 2.0, when they get on academic recovery, they have to actually meet with me and we go through an agreement. They have to sign an agreement. But as we're talking, I can tell they feel bad that, they feel like they failed, that their GPA came down. But there's so many reasons, and I sit there and I talk with them and I tell them that, they're not the only one, that we learn from all of these. The actual, they call failures, are the mistakes that we made or the mishaps, whatever. So we talk about those and what we can do to change that. You learn from your mistake, or so-called failure, if they want to call it that. You learn from it and you make a change. And so that's what we do during our conversations is what did you do before? Why do you feel that you got below a 2.0? And a lot of times it's personal reasons, the family, medical, there's all kind of things like that. Or, weren't really disciplined enough. And so what is it we can change this time? What are we going to do different this time?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I like you challenging the use of that word failure too, because I feel like failure has such a negative connotation for people. Whenever I say that, failure implies that there's something wrong with me personally and that I'm just not good enough, basically, is kind of what it's become over time. And I like the way that you point out that it's not necessarily that there's anything wrong with me. And even if it does come down to something like, I just didn't have the time management skills to be successful, that still doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. You just weren't afforded those skills up until now.
Right, exactly. Failure is just an event. It's just something that happened. It's not an identity. We don't need to call ourselves a failure because we did something, made a mistake, or we didn't pass a test, or we had to sit out for a semester, which we no longer do that. It's just an event, but you change to change that event. It's not something we live with, that we have to say, I'm a failure. I can't do anything better. You do. You work on it. It's not something. And believe me, I have had failures in my life, and but I grow from them. I've changed different things. Yeah. So it's possible.
I like the way you put that too, because I was just having a conversation with my daughter 2 nights ago because she was looking at her PSAT scores, and she's going into 9th grade now. So she's sitting there looking at her score and she's like, hey, is this a good score? And I Google it according to her age, and it says it's basically like an average score on the PSAT. And I tell her, well, I mean, it's a pretty good score considering that you didn't study specifically for the PSAT, but it's also just testing your ability to take a test at the end of the day. She's like, well, no, it's too low. It means that I'm just not smart. Am I not smart because I got this low score? I'm like, it doesn't mean you're not smart. It just means that you weren't prepared to take that test specifically. You've been preparing to take the STAR bar test all this time. You didn't
Yeah,
prepare for that
that's
test. It
right.
doesn't mean that it doesn't reflect on your intelligence in any way. It just means that, you could study more to be better at this specific test, but it doesn't mean that it's a reflection of your intelligence.
That's exactly right. And in studying for specific tests, history, I am not a history person.
Yeah, me
I will
neither.
do a math and science any day of the week, but you give me history or government, I will freak out. I know I have to study more for those just to be able to take that test. And anxiety when I walk in there to take it, I have to calm myself down
Yeah.
going into an exam and say, you can do this, you can do this. I may not like the first question, so I'll jump to the second question and
Mhm.
say, once I get going with it, it seems to come back.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have the anxiety with that too.
And I think that's a good thing to point out too, even is that it is an adaptive process. And that's the whole theme of this episode too, is adaptation, right? Because, and I guess this ties into the next question too, of what does falling forward, what does this mean to you professionally, personally? What does the concept of being adaptive in this way mean to you?
It means growing. I think that when you fall forward, you're growing. You've learned from a mishap or something that you didn't do well on. You've learned from it. What can I do different?
Yeah.
Professionally, oh gosh, yes, I've made some mishaps, and not just right when I first started the jobs that I did. I've taught
Mm.
school. I might not have taught it the right way at one point, but I learned from that, and I went back and changed the way I taught. Now I make a lot of decisions, and not every decision is usually the best decision. So I've learned from that, and I'll say, okay, what's going to happen if I make this decision? What's going to happen if I make this decision? What's going to happen? And I try
Mhm.
to look at all angles of that. Personally, again, it's a growth, and you may come out better after
Yeah.
you've made your changes.
Hmm.
You become a better person.
Well, and that's a big part of it too. I feel like if we're never uncomfortable and we're never pushed and we never fail, we never have that opportunity to
Mhm,
grow and to develop. And I
mhm,
feel like as people, we're so almost like narrow minded in the sense of whenever we do experience a failure, typically we make it mean something about us. When in
mhm,
reality, I feel like 99% of the time, most of the people that I talk to, we do the best that we can with what we have in any given moment. And later, sure, you can look back and say, well, I should have known XYZ, but you didn't at that time. You made
mhm.
a decision based on the information available to you. And sometimes it's not all the information. But bottom line, you did the best you could with what you had at that moment. It's just
Exactly.
you today that has grown can look back and say, that was not the best decision I could have made.
That's right. And it's just like I said, it's just growing every day. You're going to be faced with decisions you have to make,
Mhm.
and sometimes they may not be the right decision or the good decision, but it's with what information you have.
Yeah, absolutely. So, are there any particular myths that you see students have a lot, misconceptions maybe about failure that you want to dispel? We have this platform right now to dispel some of those myths around failure, especially in this context of like the success culture and perfectionism that we see a lot with students and just people in general. Are there any
Mhm.
myths you want to dispel?
Probably one is that, there's really smart people out there and they don't ever make mistakes. They're professional, they have great jobs, they have great homes, they have great families. No,
Hmm.
that's there's things that's happened in their life
Hmm.
that they have failed
They
at.
just don't let you see.
They
Yeah.
don't let you see it, but they apparently grew from that decision so that they could be more successful. They've
Hmm.
learned from that.
Yeah. And I
But
hear that a lot with students too. They'll say, I don't know why I have to work so hard to make the grade that I do. I feel like everyone around me doesn't have to work nearly as hard as I do. And my challenge to that is always I don't think that you can see how hard they work
yeah.
because I think it's probably similar to how hard you work. And even if it's not, it's kind of like you said, I'm the opposite of you. I don't have to try at English, philosophy, humanities types classes because it just clicks for my brain.
Mhm.
Whereas every other subject, history, math, science, all of it, it is a chore to try to drag myself through.
Yes, yeah, I do not want to have to read that history, but
Yes.
I you have to make yourself. Yep.
For sure. So, and I like that you touched on that too, because there is this misconception or this negative thought that we can get stuck in our head, a negative belief of successful people don't fail. When in reality, like you said, there's this invisible nature of failure. People, no one's going to brag about failing.
Right.
People brag about their successes.
Mhm.
No one's going to tell you, most of the time, people aren't going to be upfront about their failures or the time that they failed.
True. True.
So there's another misconception of if I fail, then I've ruined everything, which is also unfair, right? This myth that there's like this finality in things, that one mistake is going to define my entire future, that because I failed this class, that means my entire career is over and that I'm not cut out for this profession or this field in some way.
That is not a true statement, because personal story, my very first semester when I went on, I was able to go off to college. My parents let me go off, and I was 17, and I was going to, study, and I was going to do
That's
all
a
this
lot
thing.
at 17.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, and I did not do well that first semester, because it always had come easy to me. In high school things had come easy to me, so I thought it was going to be the same type thing. Well, then I found a lot of friends that I never knew before, and so we started doing fun things, and so I did fail. I did fail, but I learned from that, and I tell a lot of my students when they're coming in to talk with me below a 2.0, hey, I've been there. I've sat in that same chair that you're sitting in. I did have to go talk to the dean. I did have to get permission to come back to school. But I grew from that. I went ahead, it took me a little while, but I got my bachelor's and I got my master's, and I'm here.
Yeah. Exactly.
And some students have told me that they have really liked that story, that if I did it and look where I am now, that they could do it too.
Yeah.
So,
and I've told this story on the podcast before, but yeah, I had a similar experience in undergrad, my bachelor degree. I had my daughter mid-semester, genuinely forgot I was in college, if I'm being honest with you, and didn't let my professors know, didn't check my email, just, signed out, and then remembered I had a class about 4 months later after the finals had passed. And so I failed those two classes, understandably so. And then the thing about it is, though, is then I convinced myself that I shouldn't even write a letter to appeal because I didn't have a good reason. And looking back on it now, I mean, what better reason is there than having an infant child and literally giving birth to a human being? But I convinced myself that that wasn't a good enough excuse to have a low GPA and to have failed two classes, which is absolutely not true. So all of that to say too, I mean, two experiences here of failure where I think that I like that you bring up that it is a mindset at that point.
It is.
If I focus on making this mean something negative about me, making this mean that I'm not good enough, all these negative things, and I focus on the failure itself, then it's easy to get lost in that versus acknowledging it, saying, okay, yes, we did make a mistake. We did fail in this situation and it is what it is. Now, what can I do moving forward? I think is the biggest mindset shift.
That's it. It's just changing it. What is it that Deb always talks about? Growth mindset or fixed mindset in the EDUC classes. It's taking that growth mindset. What are you going to do to change it?
Yeah.
It's in your hands. What are you going to do to change it? And like I said, it's things like that. Those are just events that happen in your life. It's not who you are. You're going to grow from that and you're going to change.
Yeah. So I always like to break things down into practical steps in these podcasts to make it applicable information for students, right? So let's say that I have experienced a setback or I'm feeling stuck in that mindset. What are some ways that we can start moving this ball into looking at growing and moving forward, right? So how can students start to reframe these setbacks as a learning opportunity rather than making it mean something about me personally?
It's what is it you're going to change? What are you going to do to change that? Whatever it was, the occurrence, the mishap, the mistake, whatever. How can you work to change that? Again, being in school, if I took a test and I didn't really study enough, or what am I going to do different the next time? Am I going to study more? Things like that. You like you said, getting back on track. To get you back on track, you have to make some changes. The student or person has to make some changes, and to really think about what you let me see what you might have, what the mistake was or what the mishap was, and how are you going to change it.
Yeah, almost like what went wrong here. So taking that inventory first to say, okay, what went well, what went wrong here, what needs some work, what worked really well for me, and then being able to say, okay, let's now make a plan to address this situation, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
In whatever given circumstances. And I do like that because that's where I usually start with people too, is kind of like, okay, so where did things start to fall apart? and what were you struggling with at that time?
Mhm.
And usually for a lot of people, talking it through, they can kind of start seeing those gaps of, well,
Exactly.
I was only studying an hour a week, and that probably wouldn't be enough for
Mhm.
most people. Like, no, most people, you can't only study for an hour a week and pass something.
In those same conversations, they realize it themselves. Once
Mhm.
they start talking about it, they realize, I probably could have put more time in there. I probably should have put more time in
Yeah.
there. Or I could have done it, taken a 20-minute break
Mhm.
every once in a while rather than studying all night long trying to cram it
Yeah.
in. Yeah.
And these are things that success coaching is really good for too. So even if you're not on academic probation or you
Right.
don't have too low of a GPA, these are services that you can absolutely utilize anytime throughout your college career.
Sure.
And they can help with, testing strategies, learning strategies, time management. I mean, you probably know better than I do all the
Yes, they
plethora.
can. And students just need to walk in the office and say, I want to meet with the success coach.
Mhm.
They don't have to be below 2.0. We have a lot of students who had to meet with us because they were below a 2.0, but then they
Yeah.
only had to meet with us that semester. And then all of a sudden they want to continue. They want to continue the next semester.
Yeah.
They found out that they were held accountable and they like
Mhm.
that. So they'll come back the next semester and even the next semester.
Oh,
We've had them for a
absolutely.
couple of them.
And that's the biggest thing I hear from students too that utilize you guys a lot is that they like the accountability and having that person to check in with and stay on track. And so if you are the type of person that thrives in that type of accountability,
Mhm.
success coaching can be a really good service to utilize. It's all 100% free,
Mhm.
to be able to utilize to keep yourself on track and to stay on track too. Um, but I do like that. Even so, what might you say to a student who is considering coming into success coaching, but maybe is feeling a little hesitant or uncomfortable? Is there anything that you would tell them to maybe make them feel a little bit more comfortable coming in?
Well, if they want me to, I would go in with them. If they're comfortable talking with me, I would go in there with them.
Yeah.
But also, they can just talk about anything.
Yeah.
Whatever makes them feel comfortable. And they're going to be asked questions because that's usually what the coaches do.
Mhm.
They'll ask questions. They never tell them what they have to do.
Yeah.
They just keep asking these questions. What can you do? How do you feel about that? What would you change?
Mhm.
So and they can always get up and leave if they would like.
Yeah.
But we usually don't have that happen. They will, in fact, a lot of them stay longer than their 30 minutes.
Yeah.
They're in conversations and they're enjoying those conversations and it's helping them.
Yeah.
So they want to continue.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. So, and another interesting phenomena that I want to point out so that we can be aware of whenever we do feel like we're experiencing a setback is for a lot of people, there's this really interesting thing that happens. We feel this like spotlight effect, right? And the biggest finding from this study and from this concept is that we tend to dramatically overestimate how much other people notice our mistakes or failures, or the fact that other people know that we've failed, right? So, like I said, this is called the spotlight effect. But a lot of the times, most people are way too focused on their own lives to notice or even dwell on our own
Right.
lives, right? But this is the thinking error that we have. We think everyone is watching when we do fail, but in reality, most people are so focused on themselves they may not even notice, and we're not as exposed as we might think. So sometimes this can lead to a lot of guilt or shame that we have inside of us because we experience this failure and we feel like everyone knows, everyone's judging us, people think negatively about us. And I just wanted to point this out that this is a really common experience that human beings experience.
They do. And, the thing is, too, I know I felt it,
Mhm.
but you're right. Who really knows? I mean, who
Mhm.
who knows unless I go and tell someone or maybe
Yeah.
they heard about it or something, but they've got so many things going on in their life. I don't think they care about
Mhm.
mine.
A lot of the
Yeah.
times the response when you do tell someone you failed is, "Oh my gosh, that's terrible."
Yeah.
Well, it's fine. You can always redo it or you can do
Yeah.
X, Y, and
Yeah.
Z.
Yeah.
Worst case, yeah.
Mhm.
So, do you have anything that you can share about some surprising ways that people grow emotionally, academically, socially after failure? Do you have like any stories that you feel comfortable sharing about a failure?
Mine for sure. Let me see. Mainly with students when I'm talking with them about being below a 2.0, they will they'll figure out what it is they have to change, and they
Mhm.
know that they want to get back in good standing. They do.
Yeah.
They don't want to come back and see me again, for one thing. And I think it's more of embarrassment, but I try to make them feel very comfortable, make them feel like they're not the only one.
Mhm.
There's lots of students, lots of adults that that are coming to me. So it's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's something to grow from. And I think I try to make them feel comfortable about it, and that they can always come back to me. I can help them. They're going to just go see their success coach.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that that's good too, because like I said, I think for a lot of people, I don't think it would be uncommon to experience that guilt or shame in that moment, even in the office with you of, you know, I feel this way and I have all this self-blame, and it's good that the conversations are steered in that way. I mean, I think that that would be very beneficial for people. And it's like you said, it's important to remember failure is just feedback. It's kind of information that we're getting that maybe something isn't really working to achieve our goals. This is not a final judgment. It doesn't mean that your career is over, your college experience is over. You know, this is just feedback about how we can grow and what college demands of us in order to succeed at it. It doesn't mean that you're a failure. It just meant that you struggled with that semester or with that class specifically.
Right. Yeah.
And like you said, we can ask ourselves, okay, what is this teaching me? Instead of saying, why did I mess this up? Or why am I not good enough? Now, what did this teach me about myself, about college, about this class, about this professor, or whatever it might be?
Yeah.
However, we need to break it down. And then also too, considering how past setbacks have shaped our character, empathy, or direction in hindsight. Because a lot of times it's easier to look back on something that happened 10 years ago and say, okay, I grew in this way, this way, this way, and this way. But it's because we're in this moment right here, right now, that we lack that ability to zoom out and say, okay, how is this going to challenge me? And how am I going to grow in this situation?
Yeah, I remember teaching when I first was teaching, and because I loved math, I made a big production of it. But I always had to constantly watch, because if I would lose somebody, I'd lose some of the students. And you could tell when you lose a student's attention, And so then I would have to start changing the way that I did it, little pieces, and make sure everybody's on board with me where I'm at. And then, if I found somebody that wasn't quite there, I would, get to them personally. I'd, give the other ones some sort of problem to work or something. And I'd get to that person personally to be able to help them and bring them up to where the others were.
Yeah, because it is. I mean, it's all about kind of leveling the field, so to speak, right? Because even I'm sure you can think back to an experience in your life, all of you listening, of, there's been situations in my life where I just learned a little bit differently than everyone else did, or it just took explaining it in a very specific way for something to click into my brain. And that's not a reflection of your intelligence. That's just, it speaks to the diversity of the human experience and how we all learn in very different ways. And we all have different needs. And part of success coaching and even other things too is figuring that out. That's part of your college journey. I always tell students that, like, this is your first semester. You're figuring out how to be a student right now. And you're probably going to have setbacks in that. And that's good, because you're learning what needs to change in order for you to be successful in this environment. Most people are not going to be successful in this environment right when you throw them in there. Even taking life outside of it, because life happens whether we want it to or not.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so sometimes failure can even be a redirection towards a path that's a better fit for us too. I can't tell you how many times, we've been put in a course that was particularly challenging, and that course in and of itself, or that setback in that situation, helps us, recognize that, okay, maybe this isn't something that I'm actually passionate about now that I'm in. It happened all the time, even in my master's program. We had people that came into the program, started actually doing counseling related things, and then realized this is not the thing for me. And so they had to switch paths or do something different. So sometimes that setback, sometimes that failure is just a redirection as well. That is positive that it happened at the end of the day, because we're aligning with the life that we want. But yeah, even just recognizing that we're chasing someone else's version of success too is a lot of people struggle. And
I have two grandchildren that came to college, and they got their certificates in different fields, and they went into those positions and said, "Nope, this is not for me." So they're back in school. They're going a different path now.
Yeah, it happens to the best of us. Yeah, especially in fields like counseling, where you can't do it until you're doing it, and you can't actually give it a shot until you have a master's degree and you've already invested 8 years of your life into this thing. And yeah, you get there and you're like, man, this is not for me. And yeah, it happens. It does more often than you would think that it does. Honestly.
It does. Yeah. Then that's the thing is, and I talked to both of them, because they thought that they had kind of failed. Here they went these terms with us. And then they got these jobs, and then they realized, "Ooh, that wasn't what I wanted to do." I'm not. I failed at what I was doing, and it took them, a couple of semesters to get those certificates. And they
Mm-hmm.
felt they wanted the granddaughter. She felt like she had kind of failed. And no, you
Mm-hmm.
just found out that's not what you want to do
Yeah.
now. Let's go another
Yeah.
path.
There
So
was no way for you to know that until
that's
you
right.
got in there
Until
and
you got
looked at
in
it.
there,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh. So, okay, if a student right now is listening to this in the middle of a personal low, what is some of the first things you would want them to know?
That there's help out there for you.
Mm-hmm.
Come talk to, you can talk to me, you can talk to Brittany here. There's help. Go talk to a success coach.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Anyone.
anyone that, yeah, you talk to anyone
Yeah,
really.
really.
Yeah, just talking it through with somebody is going to help.
Yeah.
You may be afraid to say what you want to say, but there's somebody that can help you.
Yeah. And really, I mean, talking is the first step because, especially talking openly about failure, setbacks, it helps us break this illusion and build more honest, connected campus cultures. And kind of like we've echoed throughout this entire episode, right? That we have all failed. Everyone at this campus, every person in position of power here has experienced a failure because we're human beings. All humans fail. So
Mhm.
you're not going to find a staff member or anyone here on campus that's going to tell you, no, I have never failed
Yeah.
before in my life. It is not going to happen. But it can make us feel less alone and more seen to hear other people's stories, which is kind of why we wanted to bring this episode up and have this conversation too. Um, so yeah, if you are struggling with failures or setbacks in some way, or even if you have to go meet with Babette, because
Yes.
now you have an introduction to her. She's not terrifying. She's not
No,
scary.
no, no.
She's one of the nicest people on this campus, honestly.
Thank you.
Um, so yeah, any other last minute thoughts or anything you want to share before we wrap up?
Uh, Come and see us. Come and
Mhm.
see us. If you have any questions, come and see us. And it's okay to fail.
Yeah.
It doesn't define you. It's just some sort of event that happened, and you'll
Yeah.
make some life-changing moments after that.
Absolutely. And I love the way you take it out of the person. It's an event.
Mhm.
It has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
Totally
Yeah.
separate from you.
Yes,
Love
exactly.
it. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today in your go to space for honest conversations about mental health and well being. We're your hosts, Brittany,
Babette.
and we're so glad that you spent part of your day with us. Remember, taking care of your mind is just as important as taking care of your body. Be kind to yourself, reach out if you need support, and know that you're never alone. So until next time, take care and take a deep breath.